If you understand this keyword in JavaScript well, you can create better programs, you can create better design patterns, you can make your code more manageable. But understanding this keyword sometimes takes a lot of time, and it happens because of the nature of JavaScript, how it has been built and how it keeps on adding new features. But it's quite simple. In this video we are going to make sure that the next time you see this keyword anywhere in JavaScript, by reading the code you know what is the value of this going to be, as well as when you write code you use this keyword to make your programs better and error free, bug free. So without further ado, let's start this video. What is this? It's similar to the conversations that we have in day-to-day life. Suppose you entered a conversation your friends are having, and your friend is saying that actor is an awesome guy. Now you don't understand what this friend is talking about. Which guy is he talking about? Who is that guy? So that guy is the context of this conversation, and if you don't understand that context, you don't understand the conversation. Similarly, in JavaScript there is a keyword this, which can be used to reference the context of the program. So I'm just saying it with very loose definition. So just the context. So all you need to remember is that this is about context. If you don't understand what is execution, and if I go about definition, it's a property of execution context. If you don't know what is execution context, we will cover this in another video. The link will be given in the comments. But for this video, you don't need to understand what is execution context, as long as you understand that example of conversation, what context means. Now, the most important question here is, what is the value of this? If you can answer this question, then your problem related to this keyword is solved. So let's get down to understanding what is the value of this, how we can determine. So first thing, this value is determined by how a function is called. Means it's decided on the runtime. If you defined a function, you didn't call it, there is no this. If you defined a function, you called, and let's say you called in different ways, then for those different ways there is going to be a different value of this. Now, another point that we need to learn about is strict mode and non-strict mode. You might have come across it already. There is this statement at the start of file, use strict, and sometimes it's not there. If it's there, then it's strict mode, and if it's not there, let's call that non-strict mode. So these are two things that I'm just telling you for reference. There is nothing much of use right now, but it can be useful in debugging. So in non-script mode, the value of this is going to be always a reference to an object. It's always going to be an object. In strict mode, on the other hand, it can be any value. It can be any value in strict mode. Now, what is the now we know the basics of the value of this. What is exactly the value of this? And one thing which will always remain true is, for global context, the value of this is always going to be global object. So I don't take my word for it, rather I would say use your console log, use your developer tools to prove that this is exactly the case. So right now I'm writing code in global context, right? It's not inside any function, it's global context. So, and I'm printing the value of this and I get window. So when in browser, window is the global context, is the global object. So thus I prove that in global execution context, the value of this is going to be a global object. And we can experiment another thing to prove that even in strict mode this statement remains true. Even in strict mode, the value of this in global context is global object. Now this was quite simple. In global context, global object is the value of this. What about function context? And that's where all the things, all the complexity that comes in, but I have put it in a structure of mind map, and it's going to make it really easy to understand these concepts, how the value, what the value of this going to be. So I'm going to share these points, and I'm going to prove side by side with console log that this is actually the case. This is the value of this in this particular scenario. So value of this in function context, as I said earlier, it depends on how you call the function. Now one way is to call simply like we call all the functions, or there are other methods like via call methods, bind method, object method, constructor, and all these things. And we are going to go through all these points one by one and prove that this value of this is going to be these values in these scenarios. So the first scenario we take is the simple call. So by simple call I mean is you define a function simply like this, and let's say I'm printing the value of this, and this is how we simply call. This is the simple call. So what is the value of this going to be? It's going to print out the value of this. Let's see, what do we have here? We have window object, the global object. So this is the case when we call a function simply like this, then we have the value of this as a global object. Now it's true in non-strict mode that we are running this code right now, but what happens in strict mode, the value of this is going to be undefined. See, this is undefined. So these are the two cases that we have for simple call, that if it is non-strict mode we have global object, if it is strict mode we have undefined. That's it, very simple case. Second thing we can talk about is there is a way to call a function by setting the value of this explicitly, and that is done via call or apply methods. If you don't know a call or apply method, there is no worry, it's very simple. You just name the function fn.call and you give the value that you want to set to this. So whatever value you want to set for this, so let's say I want to set the value of this to this object. So what am I going to get? Value of this here, whatever I just passed here. So I get x4. So this is the object that I set value of this to. So that's what I got. There is one catch, which is that when I have null, when I set value of this to null, it returned me global object, and that too only in non-strict mode. In strict mode, it will return what it had returned earlier, undefined. Whatever we set here. So we set null undefined, so this is what it returns in use strict mode. But in non-strict mode, we are calling function via .call method, then we and in non-strict mode, and when the value of this we set to is null or undefined, then in that case only we get the global object. So now to understand this, let me share a use of call method, so that will make more sense. So let's say a function is something, let's say a product, let me call it product, and a product has name. So let me log this dot name. Now I can, and let's say I have another function, let's call it computer. So computer is a product, and I want to do what? I want to call first the product with the value of this, okay, and what that's it, product.call, and then I'm going to do, let's say, anything, this dot what RAM equal to 4 GB. Okay, now here with this call method I can simply whatever I had, so I need to pass in the value of this, and let's say I passed this name computer. So in this case we are calling this function by passing the value of this to be this function. Okay, let me product.call, I set this value to name, and then I'm printing this out. So function.call, okay, cool. So I did it. Now let's call the computer function. So here it printed out computer. So let's say for some type of product I passed in just null, I didn't have the name, and at that point of time it would have returned this undefined, right? So this could have created a problems in when, let's say, if we use this in a way where this can throw a null pointer exception, that the value of this object is null. So when we have this function defined like this, and when we call this like this and we pass in null, it returns window object. This this won't throw null pointer exception if this is not strict mode, which can sometimes help you, sometimes not, but overall you get an idea that this can help you create new patterns. Okay, so we dive deep in call apply methods right now. Even if you did not understand this product computer example, there is no worry. Just remember that in call or apply methods, the default value is whatever you pass in here, except one thing, which is when you are passing in null in non-strict mode. At that point of time, the value of this is going to be the global object. And that's it. Same case is true for apply as well, apply method, and so on. So this was the call method. Now another method, another way to call function is via bind. So bind also does similar thing as we had been talking about in call method or apply method, with one difference, that instead of calling that function itself right away, what it does is that it creates copy of the function. So it creates copy of this function, binds this to the object that we pass in here. So let's call it where fnb. Now fnb is a new function which is very similar, which is exactly similar to this, except one thing, which is the value of this is set to this object. So now you understand what bind does. Same thing as call does, but with the difference that it creates new function instead of calling that function directly. And this is why in bind we will get whatever the object we set this to. Again, we can check for null what happens in null. We get global object. And what happens in when we use strict, we get undefined. So what was true for call or apply, the same thing is true for bind as well. Okay, cool. Now coming back to another way of calling function, this is object method. So let's say you have an object defined like this, and you have a function defined like this. Same function, I'm printing out the value of this. Okay, how are we going to call this? Object.fn, and just call it. And what do we get? Let me clear it up. We get this object. Whenever you call a function which is property of an object, you will get the object this function is property of. So object.fn, then you are going to get object. So whatever value you have here, that's what your value of this is going to be. Okay, now as constructor. Okay, so you might know that, okay, this is the same function we defined earlier. There is another way we can, let me call it fnc equal to new. With new keyword you can call the function. It creates a new object of this function, and it gets called right away. So if you can you run this, then what you get is this new created object. So whenever you create a new object of this function, you get the value, of this new created object in this. So that's about constructor method. And then we have more things we can discuss, or would you like to explore more? Let's explore more. So let's say if we do this in use strict, will we get any different output? Let's see. Nope, it's the same output. Even in strict mode, for new we get the same value of this, which is this newly created object. Got it? So that's how we call in function via new keyword, and the value of this is going to be the newly created object. There are more ways to call a function, but I would like to stop here. The other two things that we could have discussed were arrow function. When you call a function as an arrow function, then what is the value of console.log is going to be. I wouldn't invest much time here because I don't like this pattern. I don't like this complexity of this pattern, and this was added in ES6, and so if you want to explore this, you can just simply write down function explore as we have been exploring. I can just reiterate this, whatever the value of this is going to be. It is going to be the lexical scope. Lexical means near, which means that whatever this function is near to, whatever function scope this function is near to, that value is what we get in our output of this value. Now last point is event handlers. Event handlers, you will get the elements which where this handler was called or was placed on. You can again explore this. You can write down, simplify up your console and see what value do you get. I just avoid these two types of design patterns, two types of method calling. I avoid these two things, but if you want, you can explore this. Otherwise, you are good to go right now. Now you know what happens when you call a simple function. What happens, you get global object by default, but if you are running just in strict mode, you get undefined. Got it? If you call it via call, apply or bind, you get whatever the value that you set to this via these methods. And if it is non-strict mode and the value that you specified for this is null, or then you get global object. This is slight printing mistake here. This same thing is going to be here as well, that we had shown in example. I'll share the correct image in the description. So now another way of calling method we explored was object method, and there you get the value of this as the object where this function was called from. Now another way of calling we explored was via new keyword as a constructor, you can say in other words, and you get the value of this as the new created object. And that's it. I think that's all I wanted to share. I hope this makes things a little bit clear. I'll share this image with you in the description. You can look at it, and I'll share more resources where you can read more about it. Otherwise, you are good to go now. Whenever you are stuck or you just forget about whatever we discussed here, just fire up your console, just print this and see what happens in that case. That's it. Thanks a lot for joining in.